The desert wind carries secrets in Egypt. Across the timeless sands, where the Nile bends and whispers to the reeds, the name Nefertiti still echoes, radiant, elusive, powerful, and ultimately mysterious. Hers was a face carved in stone and memory, immortalized in one of history's most perfect busts. Yet her story is haunted by a question that refuses to fade. Was she murdered? In the heat of the 14th century BCE, during the reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, Egypt stood on the edge of revolution. The old gods had ruled for millennia: Amun, Osiris, Ra. But Akhenaten defied them all. He tore down their temples and built a city to honor one god alone, Aten, the radiant sun disk. And beside him, always visible, always equal, was Nefertiti. She wasn't merely a queen, she was a co-ruler. Her image appeared on temple walls, smiting enemies, offering sacrifices, and standing shoulder to shoulder with the pharaoh. Together, they reshaped religion, art, and power. Yet beneath that golden glow of divinity, the seeds of chaos had already taken root. Archaeologists still debate where she came from. Some say she was Egyptian, perhaps the daughter of Ai, a powerful courtier who would one day seize the throne himself. Others whisper she was of foreign blood, maybe from Mitanni, sent as part of a royal alliance. But whoever she was, she captured Akhenaten's heart, and together, they dared to rewrite Egypt's spiritual order. In the city they built Akhetaten, today known as Amarna. Everything was different. The walls were alive with scenes of the royal family in motion, in intimacy, playing with their daughters, basking under Aten's rays. Gone were the stiff, divine poses of old. The art itself reflected the king's new truth, that he and his queen were divine intermediaries, channels between the people and Aten. For years, Nefertiti was at the height of her power. She was Nefertiti. The beautiful one has come. Her name itself became a symbol of rebirth. She signed decrees, appeared in ceremonies, and may even have held her own court. Foreign ambassadors bowed before her, recognizing that this queen was no mere consort. She was a partner in rule, and perhaps in time, something even greater. But then, without warning, she vanished. By the 12th or 14th year of Akhenaten's reign, her name disappeared from inscriptions. Her titles were erased. Her likeness faded from the walls. A new co-regent appeared beside the pharaoh, one named Smenkhare. Scholars have argued for decades over who this person truly was. Some say Smenkhare was a young man, possibly Akhenaten's son or brother. Others believe that Smenkhare was Nefertiti herself, adopting a new name to rule as pharaoh in her own right. Yet for all the theories, one chilling possibility has never fully disappeared: that Nefertiti did not die of natural causes, nor fade quietly from history, but was silenced. The political climate around Amarna had turned poisonous. Akhenaten's monotheistic revolution had enraged the priesthood of Amun, whose power and wealth had been stripped away. The generals, who once offered prayers to the old gods before battle, now muttered behind closed doors. The people, deprived of their familiar temples, grew uneasy. Famine and plague stalked the land. Whispers began that the Aten's favor was waning. The royal family, once adored, became isolated within their gilded city. It's here, in this crucible of devotion and dissent, that Nefertiti's trail goes cold. Some say she fell from grace, that Akhenaten, obsessed with his new faith, cast her aside for another. Others argue that she opposed him, realizing too late that his reforms had torn Egypt apart. In this telling, she became a threat, not to his heart, but to his power. Centuries later, archaeologists would unearth clues in fragments and tombs. Letters from foreign rulers hint at turmoil in Egypt's royal house. One tablet, written by a widow to the Hittite king, pleads for help. Her husband, the pharaoh, has died, and she has no son to rule. "Send me one of your sons," she writes, "and he will be my husband and king of Egypt." The identity of this widow has long been debated, Some say she was Ankhesenamun, wife of Tutankhamun. But others, whispering between lines of history, suspect it might have been Nefertiti herself, desperate to hold on to the throne after Akhenaten's death. The plea was answered. The Hittites sent a prince, Zenanza, to Egypt. But he never arrived. Somewhere near the border, he was murdered. A warning, perhaps, from those who would not allow a foreigner to sit on Egypt's throne. If Nefertiti truly wrote that letter, her days were numbered. Archaeological evidence from Amarna tells of a sudden shift in royal imagery. Nefertiti's daughters begin to appear more prominently. The queen's cartouches are altered or replaced. The Aten cult's dominance begins to waver. The tombs of the city, left unfinished, suggest a hurried exodus. The city itself, the dream of a new world, is abandoned. And somewhere within those final years, Nefertiti disappears. Was she struck down in a palace conspiracy? Did Akhenaten himself, once her partner in divine vision, order her death? Or was she quietly buried, her body hidden, to protect it from those who hated her memory? Modern excavations at Amarna have offered fragments of truth. Among the ruins, archaeologists found what might be the burial chamber of a royal woman. The body had been disturbed, the name chiseled out. Some bones suggest a woman in her 30s, a queen. Others say this body belonged to someone else. Perhaps Kia, another wife of Akhenaten, or even the mysterious mother of Tutankhamun. Yet the question remains, if Nefertiti was murdered, where is her body? In 2015, Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves made a startling claim. Using high-resolution scans of Tutankhamun's tomb, he detected what appeared to be hidden doorways behind the walls. He proposed that the boy king's tomb was originally part of a larger complex, one meant for a queen. And that queen, he suggested, might be Nefertiti. If true, it would mean Tutankhamun was buried hastily in an annex of his stepmother's tomb, and that her mummy, long lost, might still rest only feet away. The Egyptian authorities ordered further scanning, but the results were inconclusive. Some radar studies supported Reeves's theory, others refuted it. The truth, as ever with Nefertiti, remained shrouded in mystery. Still, many Egyptologists remain convinced she did not simply die and vanish. Her power was too great, her presence too commanding. There must have been a reckoning, and in a court filled with intrigue, jealousy, and religious fury, murder is never far from the throne. Even after Akhenaten's death, when Egypt's young rulers restored the old gods and abandoned Amarna, the fear of Nefertiti's memory persisted. Her statues were smashed, her name defaced, her images buried beneath layers of plaster. The priesthood of Amen sought to erase her existence, as though by striking her name they could kill her twice. But history has its own patience. In 1912, German archaeologist Ludwig Borchardt uncovered a sculpture in the workshop of Thutmose, Akhenaten's royal sculptor. It was a limestone bust of Nefertiti, serene, symmetrical, impossibly beautiful. When the dust settled and sunlight struck her face for the first time in over 3,000 years, the world rediscovered a queen who refused to stay forgotten. That moment reignited the mystery. Who was she really? Where had she gone? And why did her end remain unspoken in the very civilization that had deified her? After Nefertiti vanished from record, the balance of power in Egypt began to tilt dangerously. Amarna, once the shining symbol of divine unity, was slowly crumbling under the weight of unrest. The priests of Amen, though silent for years, waited in the shadows. The generals whispered of the old days. The people prayed to gods who were no longer allowed to exist. And in the royal palace, where the light of Aten once poured through open courtyards, the walls echoed with tension. Akhenaten himself had grown fragile, gaunt introspective and isolated. He had once believed that through Aten's light he could purify Egypt. Now he seemed consumed by it. The sun that had once been his god became his torment. His court began to fracture. Advisors turned cautious, then fearful. Some disappeared overnight. Among those still seen by his side in the early years was a shadowy figure, a man named I, father of one of Nefertiti's attendants, perhaps her own father, perhaps not. I was shrewd and calculating, a survivor of many reigns. While others fell from grace, I endured. Behind him stood another power, General Horemheb, commander of the army, a man loyal not to the Aten, but to Egypt itself. Or so he would later claim. These men watched as Akhenaten's kingdom withered. They saw his daughters die one by one, victims of plague or divine wrath. They saw the royal bloodline shrink until only one heir remained, a frail boy who would later rule as Tutankhamun, the living image of Aten. And through it all, the question lingered: where was Nefertiti? The last inscriptions that mention her name come from around the 12th year of Akhenaten's rule. Then silence. But in that same period, a new ruler appears, a co-regent named Ankh-Khepurur Nefer-Neferatan. The name carries traces of Nefertiti's own. Nefer-Neferatan was one of her titles. It is possible that, rather than falling from power, she ascended higher than ever before, ruling alongside her husband as pharaoh in all but name. Yet even this theory ends in disappearance. The following year another name emerges, Smenkhkare Djeserkaperu. The records are brief, the image is rare. This ruler's reign was short, perhaps no more than a year or two. Then, once again, silence. It is here that the lines blur completely, where gender, titles, and faces merge into one another, as though history itself were trying to hide a crime. Was Smenkhkare Nefertiti under a new name, ruling in disguise as a man to preserve control? Some ancient depictions of Smenkhkare show a slender body, delicate features, and an oddly feminine form. Others depict a young man standing beside Akhenaten in ritual poses once reserved for Nefertiti. If they were the same person, her transformation would have been daring. The first woman to rule openly as pharaoh since Hatshepsut. But if they were not, then Smenkhkare's sudden appearance, and equally sudden death, demands explanation. Some scholars believe Akhenaten appointed a male co-ruler to ensure continuity. Others suggest that Nefertiti's influence had become too great, her presence too divine, and that those around Akhenaten sought to replace her. In either case, within a few short years, both Akhenaten and Smenkhkare were gone. Amarna fell silent. The city, once filled with hymns to Aten, was abandoned. Its temples were sealed, its houses deserted, its palaces stripped of gold and art. The capital shifted back to Thebes, where the priests of Amun reclaimed their lost power. And at the heart of this restoration stood two men, the cunning vizier, and Horemheb, the general who had waited patiently for his time. But before they ruled, a child was crowned, Tutankhamun. Under the guidance of and Horemheb, he changed his name to Tutankhamun, restoring the worship of Amun and denouncing his father's heresy. It was the official death of the Aten cult, and with it, the final erasure of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Yet the boy king's reign raises further questions. Who taught him to rule? Who shaped his early years, his beliefs, his loyalties? Some claim that it was whispering the old ways into his ear. But others point to the queen who had once ruled beside Akhenaten, the woman who may have survived the fall of Amarna and lingered in the shadows, guiding the boy's early steps. If Nefertiti had indeed taken on a new name, perhaps as Smenkhkare, or as a female pharaoh ruling briefly after Akhenaten's death, she could have lived long enough to see the old gods return. But For such a figure, that return would have been fatal. The priesthood would not forgive. The generals would not tolerate, and the court would not forget. It is here that the theory of murder sharpens to a blade. Imagine Nefertiti, once the embodiment of divine beauty and power, now stripped of allies, her city deserted, her god disgraced. The men she had once commanded, now bowed to new masters. Perhaps her own kin, now served the resurgent Ammon. Horemheb, loyal to no one but the throne, waited for any opportunity to secure his power. In such a climate, the survival of Nefertiti would have been an unbearable risk. She had been the face of the heresy, the woman who stood beside Akhenaten as he desecrated the temples of Amun, as he tore down centuries of faith. To leave her alive was to invite rebellion. Some believe she was placed under house arrest, confined within the palace at Amarna, while others seized control. Others claim she was quietly executed, poisoned, strangled, or simply erased. No official record would ever acknowledge such an act. No scribe would dare write it. Her name would be omitted, her tomb concealed, her memory condemned to oblivion. And yet, in Egypt, nothing remains buried forever. Centuries later, when archaeologists began to peel back the layers of history, they found traces that refused to fit the official story. In the Valley of the Kings, tomb KV35 yielded a discovery. 3 mummies, hastily placed within a single chamber. Among them lay a woman known only as the Younger Lady. Her skull bore a deep wound, a gash that some have argued could not have been accidental. DNA analysis later revealed that she was the mother of Tutankhamun and the sister of Akhenaten. But could she also have been Nefertiti? The DNA results complicated more than they revealed. If the Younger Lady was Akhenaten's sister, she could not also have been his wife, unless Nefertiti herself was of royal blood. A theory that, while not impossible, lacks proof. Still, the wound on her skull remains haunting, a violent mark that hints at murder. Some experts argue that the blow was inflicted after death, or by accident during mummification. Others believe it was deliberate, a fatal strike to the head. It's tempting to see in that shattered bone the final act of Nefertiti's story, the silencing of a queen whose power had become too great. Even more tantalizing is the possibility that her body has never been found at all, that the Younger Lady is another royal woman, perhaps Kia or another wife, and that Nefertiti still lies hidden behind walls of stone. In 2018, new radar scans of Tutankhamun's tomb revived the speculation. Some readings showed voids behind the north and west walls, suggesting hidden chambers. For a moment, hope flared again, that beyond those painted surfaces, untouched for millennia, the true tomb of Nefertiti awaited discovery. But when further tests were conducted, the evidence seemed to vanish. Some teams found no trace of any hidden room. The sands of Egypt, it seemed, had once again swallowed their secrets. Yet one question refuses to die. If Nefertiti was murdered, who ordered it? The suspects are many, and all had motive. Akhenaten himself, if she opposed his religious extremism. If he sought the throne she once ruled. Horemheb, if he saw her as a threat to the restoration of order. Or perhaps she fell to those nameless forces, the priests, the generals, the courtiers, who decided that the only way to cleanse Egypt of heresy was to eliminate its queen. Her death, if it happened at all, was covered with precision. There were no public funerals, no inscriptions, no mourning songs. The woman who once stood beside the sun god disappeared into silence. But history has a strange way of preserving its ghosts. Her bust, found centuries later, became a face for eternity, serene, defiant, unyielding. And behind that calm expression, perhaps lies the memory of betrayal. Even now, scholars sift through fragments of her story, broken amulets, unfinished tombs, letters written in trembling script. Each clue offers a glimpse of what might have been, a queen who rose to divinity, who ruled beside a revolutionary king, who watched her world collapse, and who in her final days may have paid the ultimate price for daring to stand beside the sun. The world that followed Nefertiti's disappearance was one of restoration, vengeance, and silence. Amarna, once the radiant capital of the sun, lay abandoned to dust. Columns toppled, walls cracked, and the faces of the royal family were hammered from stone. The light of Aten that once bathed the palaces in gold now scorched only empty sand. The priests of Amun wasted no time. They returned to their temples in Thebes, reinstated the old rituals, and ordered the destruction of every trace of the Aten cult. The revolution Akhenaten and Nefertiti had built together was dismantled piece by piece. In the midst of this, the young king Tutankhamun was barely more than a child. Under the watchful eye of his advisors, Ai and Horemheb, he reversed his father's decrees. The worship of Amun was restored, the capital moved back to Thebes, and his name changed to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The boy's reign was meant to heal Egypt's wounds, but behind the scenes, older hands guided every decision. I, ever the court manipulator, had survived the fall of Akhenaten and positioned himself as the king's grandfatherly mentor. Horemheb, the soldier, ensured the army remained loyal. Together, they maintained an uneasy alliance, a balance of ambition and caution. Yet there were ghosts in the court. And the most haunting of all was the name that could not be spoken, Nefertiti. Her absence lingered over every chamber of power. The priests refused to utter her name, the scribes avoided her image, and the walls of Amarna whispered her story in silence. For Ai and Horemheb, she was both a threat and an opportunity. Her death, or disappearance, had cleared the path to power. But her legend, her image of divine beauty, her association with the sun god, still captivated those who remembered her. If she had been killed, her murderers had succeeded only halfway. They had buried her body, but not her shadow. As Tutankhamun grew older, cracks began to form in the careful mask of peace. The boy king may have started to assert his own will, to rule not as a puppet, but as a pharaoh. Perhaps he learned too much about the past, or questioned the silence surrounding his stepmother's fate. His tomb would later reveal a world steeped in secrecy. Treasures hastily arranged, burial rites rushed, and walls painted in scenes that hint at unfinished business. Then, suddenly, he too was gone. Tutankhamun died around the age of 18. His death remains one of history's greatest enigmas. A broken leg, perhaps, or a blow to the head. Some call it accident. Others whisper assassination. The pattern was too familiar. Those who rose near the shadow of Nefertiti's legacy seemed to fall swiftly. After Tutankhamun's death, A seized the throne. Old, cunning, and ruthless, he crowned himself pharaoh, taking the young king's widow, Ankhesenamun, as his queen. But even in his coronation scenes, there is a telling image, A performing the ritual of burial over Tutankhamun's body, as though he had already buried the boy before he wore the crown. Some believe A's rise was the final step in a long and bloody plan, a series of quiet eliminations stretching back to Nefertiti herself. If she had once opposed his ambitions, she would have been the first to fall. Akhenaten's death followed, then the mysterious disappearance of Smenkhare, and finally Tutankhamun. Each ruler removed, each obstacle cleared, Horemheb watched from the shadows. Patient as ever, he allowed A to reign briefly before seizing power himself. When Horemheb took the throne, he declared himself the restorer of order, the avenger of Egypt. He struck the names of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and all their kin from history. Inscriptions were rewritten, monuments were usurped. To the world, it was as if the Amarna period had never happened. The queen who had once ruled as the living embodiment of Aten was erased from memory. And yet, beneath the sands, time refused to obey. Archaeologists, centuries later, would find fragments that resisted oblivion. A broken statue here, a cartouche there, a single painted wall surviving in an abandoned tomb. Each discovery breathed faint life into the queen's ghost. In 1912, when Borchardt uncovered her bust, the world saw not a heretic, not a forgotten queen, but an icon of beauty and power. Her face, perfectly symmetrical, eyes, calm and knowing, seemed to mock those who had tried to destroy her. The bust became a symbol of ancient perfection. But for historians, it was also a reminder of the queen who disappeared too neatly, too completely. Modern Egyptology turned her into a puzzle. Each generation sought her tomb, her mummy, her story. And with every discovery came new speculation about how or why she died. In the late 20th century, forensic science entered the debate. The unidentified mummies of the Valley of the Kings were scanned, measured, and tested. The so-called younger lady, found in KV-35, drew particular attention. Her facial structure bore a striking resemblance to the famous bust. Her age, roughly between 25 and 35, matched Nefertiti's presumed death. But one feature stood out above all: the massive wound on her skull, gaping and deep, inflicted by a sharp object. It could have been an accident, or it could have been murder. If the younger lady was indeed Nefertiti, the wound might be the answer the centuries have hidden. A single strike to the head, enough to kill instantly, followed by a hasty burial. A queen silenced by force, entombed without ceremony. The DNA testing of 2010 brought more clarity, but also more confusion. The younger lady was identified as Tutankhamun's mother, which would make her Akhenaten's sister, not Nefertiti, unless the queen herself was of royal blood. Some dismissed the idea entirely. Others argued that the DNA evidence might not tell the whole story, that perhaps the mummies had been mislabeled or misidentified long ago. Egypt's royal tombs were not immune to chaos. Bodies were moved, hidden, robbed, and reburied by priests trying to protect them from looters. Names were swapped, wrappings replaced. Over time, the true identities of many mummies were lost. It is entirely possible that Nefertiti's remains lie among them, misnamed, unrecognized, waiting for someone to see the truth in her face. Then came Nicholas Reeves, with his proposal that Nefertiti's tomb lay hidden within Tutankhamun's. Using scans that revealed possible chambers behind the painted walls, Reeves reignited the world's fascination. He argued that Tutankhamun's tomb was far too small for a king, too hastily prepared, suggesting it was originally meant for someone else, a queen, possibly Nefertiti. His theory sparked debate, hope, and skepticism in equal measure. The Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities ordered radar surveys, but the results conflicted. Some data showed voids consistent with hidden rooms, others showed none. The desert kept its secret. Still, the idea persists that Nefertiti was murdered, entombed in secrecy, and that her body lies only a few meters beyond the painted walls of the most famous tomb in Egypt. What motive could drive her murder? The answers lie in the tangled web of faith and power that defined her life. Akhenaten's revolution had divided Egypt between those who followed the Aten and those who clung to the old gods. When famine struck and enemies pressed at the borders, the priests of Amun saw opportunity. They would restore balance and erase the heretics. In this political storm, Nefertiti became both symbol and scapegoat. Her beauty, once adored, became her danger. She was the face of the heresy, the visible half of Akhenaten's dream. When that dream collapsed, someone had to pay. Whether I ordered it, whether Horemheb allowed it, whether it came from a secret council of priests, no record survives. Only a wound, a silence, and a legend. But sometimes silence speaks louder than words. The fact that her name was erased so completely, that her statues were smashed so deliberately, suggests fear. Not hatred, fear. A woman erased with such thoroughness was not forgotten by accident. She was removed because she was still powerful, even in death. The story of Nefertiti ends not in certainty, but in echoes. Thousands of years have passed since she walked through the halls of Amarna, yet her presence still breathes through every fragment, every line of hieroglyph carved in haste, every painted wall half erased by time. The sands may have buried her body, but not her legend, and perhaps that is the truest punishment for those who sought to erase her, that she remains alive in memory, while her enemies are long forgotten. Modern archaeology continues to chase her ghost. Every excavation in the Valley of the Kings carries the whisper of her name. Every new radar image, every mummy unwrapped, every DNA strand studied, seems to bring her closer. And then just as quickly, she slips away again. In the early 21st century, the search for her tomb became an obsession. Dr. Nicholas Reeves' theory about hidden chambers behind Tutankhamun's tomb sparked renewed hope. Scientists and archaeologists gathered in Luxor, their instruments humming softly in the night, probing beneath walls painted over 3,000 years ago. For a moment the world held its breath. Could the most famous queen of Egypt be resting within the most famous tomb on earth? But when the results were announced, the answer remained as uncertain as ever. One team found evidence of voids, possible rooms. Another found nothing at all. The sands of Egypt, always patient, kept her secrets still. Even as technology advanced, CT scans, DNA sequencing, high-resolution imaging, Nefertiti refused to yield. Her story is more than a matter of bones and tombs. It is a mirror of power, faith, and the cost of challenging both. If she was murdered, her death was not just an act of violence, it was a political ritual. Egypt could not simply forget her. It had to destroy her memory, rewrite her place in history, and strip her of her name. That was the Egyptian way to kill twice. Once in life, and once in memory. But memory has ways of surviving. The bust found in Thutmose's studio still draws crowds in Berlin, thousands of years after her fall. People stare into her calm, symmetrical face, searching for clues in her silence. Her missing left eye, never finished by the sculptor, feels like a symbol now, as though she still watches us through one eye, the other fixed forever in shadow. Whoever ordered her death, if death came by murder, must have believed that erasing her was necessary for Egypt's salvation. But history suggests otherwise. The Amarna period, brief as it was, left an indelible mark. It changed Egyptian art, redefined royal iconography, and introduced a concept that no priest could undo: the intimacy between the divine and the human. Akhenaten's revolution died, but its echo lived on in the lines of scripture, in the stories of gods made flesh, and in the enduring fascination with those who dared to question eternity. In that sense, Nefertiti's legacy survived her killers. Still, the mystery of her end refuses to fade. Some Egyptologists argue that she lived long after Akhenaten, ruling as Neferuaten, and died peacefully before Tutankhamun's reign. Others insist she died much earlier, perhaps falling victim to the plague that swept through Amarna. And yet others, those drawn to the darker corners of history, maintain that she was murdered, her death the price of her husband's heresy. If we look closely at the evidence, the sudden erasure of her name, the replacement of her images, the abrupt shift in power, the pattern does not resemble a peaceful death. It feels like removal. It feels like purging. There are no records of a grand funeral, no tomb inscriptions celebrating her passing, no relics bearing her full royal titles. For a queen of her magnitude, that absence is itself a confession. I's reign was short. He died within 4 years, leaving little behind but suspicion. Horemheb followed, ruling for decades and erasing the entire Amarna line from history. He ordered all inscriptions of Akhenaten and his family destroyed, their names chiseled away, their achievements claimed as his own. To later generations, they never existed. But Horemheb's efforts failed, because the stones remembered. Buried statues, hidden tombs, forgotten busts. They waited quietly for millennia, until the hands of modern archaeologists uncovered them once more. And when the dust settled, Nefertiti's face returned to the world, calm and perfect as it had been the day Thutmose carved it. There is something uncanny about that face, a stillness that holds secrets. Her beauty has been called divine, but it is her serenity that unsettles. It is as though she knew how history would end, that the men who plotted her downfall would fade into dust, while she would live forever in color and stone. Even now, her image adorns museums, books, and documentaries. The same priests who cursed her name ensured, by their fury, that we would never stop speaking it. Was she murdered? Perhaps. But if she was, then her killers failed utterly. For what is murder if the victim never truly dies? Consider her legacy. A queen who ruled beside her husband as an equal, who dared to challenge 1,000 years of tradition, who transformed the image of Egyptian art, and who remains one of the most recognized faces in all of human history. No conqueror's blade, no priest's curse, no chisel of erasure could extinguish that. Her story reminds us that history is written by the survivors, but remembered by the dead. The sands of Amarna are silent now. The sun rises and falls over its ruins just as it did in her day, casting long shadows across broken altars. Somewhere beneath those stones, the bones of courtiers, servants, and perhaps the queen herself lie entombed in eternal light. The wind still hums through the empty halls, carrying faint echoes of music, laughter, prayers, the sound of a civilization that believed it could touch the divine. And perhaps, if one listens closely enough, one can still hear her voice in that wind. Not a cry of pain, but a whisper of defiance. Because even if Nefertiti was murdered, even if her death was written in secrecy and blood, she achieved the one thing her enemies could never destroy: immortality. For in every museum that displays her face, in every book that retells her story, and in every historian who still searches the desert for her tomb, Nefertiti lives. The queen who vanished into silence became the queen who could never be forgotten. And maybe that is the truest ending of all, that the mystery of her death is the very reason her story endures. A secret guarded not by walls or priests, but by time itself. So when the sun rises over the Nile, its light touching the ruins of Amarna, one might imagine her still there, standing in the courtyard of her golden city, the rays of Aten pouring over her, her profile framed in light. A queen, eternal and untouchable, her enemies long dead, her story still alive, and her question, was Queen Nefertiti murdered, forever unanswered, forever alive, carried on the wind of history.